what we have found is that those students who use technology or their phones for interest-driven and knowledge-driven purposes, it's beneficial for both their well-being and their academic success. If technology is developing like this, and schools are developing like this when it comes of making use of technologies, then there is an increasing gap between the reality at school and reality of the so-called real world. And that may end up in problems that there is the lack of relevance. We are just talking about screen time, and I think that's not very relevant. We need to know what people are doing there.
Our guest today is Dr. Kirsti Lonka, a professor of educational psychology from the Faculty of Education Sciences at the University of Helsinki in Finland. She's also a published author with many books to her name, including Phenomenal Learning from Finland, which has been translated into many global languages. Thank you for coming all the way from Finland. We're really, really pleased to have you here today.
Thank you very much for a kind invitation, and it's really nice to be here and share these ideas that I know many parents, teachers, educationalists are wondering about.
We've all seen headlines that say technology use in the classroom is damaging for learning. You've done a lot of research in this area, so what's your stance on this in a sentence or two?
Our thinking is too polarized over this topic. We think either ban technologies or just embrace them without any criticism. And I guess I'm a bit boring being in the middle of this. Based on evidence, people may have quite heated opinions about the topic, but what we know from our research is that we should, instead of leaving kids alone with their devices, we should help them to learn how to use them in a productive and meaningful way.
You've hit on a question that we get a lot from our audience, and that is, can technology be used well in a classroom? And have you observed that?
What we have found is that those students who use technology or their phones for interest-driven and knowledge-driven purposes, it's beneficial for both their well-being and their academic success. A majority of children are just using phones for hanging out with friends and posting pictures and things like that. And of course, social life is important, but leaving too early too young children alone with their devices without helping them to develop better practices, that may be harmful. Our kids are not brainwashed by devices. They are not addicted. They just need to learn how to use them together with adults.
Yeah.
And a school is a place where they spend most of their days. So that's one place that would increase equality if everybody would have the chance to learn this.
You and I have known each other a little while. Can you tell me a bit more about your amazing research called Mind the Gap?
Okay. In 2011, we started noticing this widening gap between the school and outside world when it came to digital divide, how children were using technology out of school for entertainment purposes and hardly anything at school. My colleague, professor, was visiting London, and there is always this Mind the Gap on the tube.
Is that where you got the name from?
Yes, we got the
awesome.
idea from London, actually.
Yeah.
The widening gap means that if technology is developing like this, and schools are developing like this when it comes of making use of technologies, then there is an increasing gap between the reality at school and reality of the so-called real world. And that may end up in problems that there is the lack of relevance, I would say relevance, for young children and youth. I have to remind you, the gap hypothesis was something that we tested for 15 years after that. First, we started testing whether this hypothesis of schools and outside world being kind of this emerging gap between those two. And then our next project was called Bridging the Gaps, because we actually found this gap between what's happening inside and outside schools. And we had a real concern And we found alarming evidence that we need to do something about this, not only in Finland, but globally.
And so what is the hypothesis you were testing with Mind the Gap?
Are we alienating our children from school? So we followed kids who were born 2000. We started following them when they were on 6th grade, through middle school or secondary, through high school, and until they were entering universities or working life.
And what were you looking at?
We were looking at their well-being, their use of technologies, their engagement at school, and their academic achievement. In Finland, you need to understand a bit background about this.
Yeah, please, yes.
A primary school in Finland is very specific. We start school when kids are 7 years old. We have preschool before that, but it's very playful in nature. And during primary school, grade 1 to 6, they very much have the same teacher for many years. So the teacher becomes a very meaningful adult in their lives. And the kids in Finland, Helsinki area cohort, we investigated. They love their teachers. Teaching is a popular profession.
Yeah.
And they found the teacher to be a central component of the schooling engagement.
Yeah.
But the only thing that the teacher couldn't support, according to the students, was their digital engagement.
Okay.
So on 6th grade, children were still quite engaged, but they already complained about this. But then, which is a global phenomenon, school engagement then tends to drastically drop between grades 7 and 9
Okay.
during the teenage years.
And can you tell me a bit about how you measure or think about engagement?
Well, engagement is something, ordinary engagement at work. I hope it's ordinary, that it happens often. People feel energetic. They love to go to the office. They are absorbed in something interesting. And they are enthusiastic about what they are doing. And one thing, it's meaningful for them.
Yeah.
So they do something
Yeah.
that they value. So what we measure is school engagement. And school engagement has these components: dedication, energy, absorption. But then burnout, we also measure that, school burnout. And it's like you start becoming cynical about school or studying. And cynical, meaning that you don't see the meaning of it. You don't see the relevance of it. You start questioning the value of school. That's maybe the worst.
Yeah.
But the second component is exhaustion.
Interesting.
You are doing something just because parents and teachers demand, and you are tired, and you are doing this,
Yeah.
and you get exhausted
We've all
about
been there.
it.
Yeah.
And the third component is very decisive as well. It's a sense of inadequacy.
Yeah.
And inadequacy means that you don't feel adequate. You don't feel that you fit in. You constantly feel that the challenge is higher than your skills.
Yeah.
And the challenge also should be relevant.
Yeah.
If it's something that you don't understand why you're doing it, you feel inadequate and stupid at school, and you may feel energetic and competent outside school.
So you mentioned in your research, Mind the Gap, that you saw a drop-off in engagement between grades 6 to 9 in Finland.
Yes.
Give or take. And what did you put that down to? Or what did the research, what were the drivers of that?
Well, there are several reasons, but in middle school, there are teenage years, and we know that they are a bit stormy sometimes.
Yeah.
And teenagers are especially, it's not a good idea to start banning things or controlling them or putting them down, because what follows is rebel.
Yeah.
During middle school, it's a global phenomenon, but in our data it showed that engagement is declining constantly during these years. And especially for boys.
Tell me a bit more about that. I've got 3 of my own, so I'm fascinated
Yes.
to learn a bit more about what it all means.
School engagement was declining drastically among boys, especially among boys who would like to use technologies for their learning, but were not allowed to do so. It felt like we are alienating these young men
Yeah.
from school, and they start feeling that it's not relevant for them.
Yeah.
They feel inadequate at school.
Yeah.
They may be strong outside school.
Yeah.
And they start losing the meaning and becoming cynical about education in general.
Mm-hmm.
And then it follows. In Finland already we can see that girls are doing much better at school, even nowadays in mathematics and natural sciences.
Yeah.
And boys, they only start feeling better if they go to a vocational school. If boys go to high school, what then
Interesting.
happens over high school
Yeah.
is that boys become increasingly cynical about studying, and girls become exhausted. Not because they find school very engaging, also their engagement is dropping, but they have this sense of duty and they are more compliant. So they try to meet the demands of adults, and they get increasingly exhausted. And in the long term, it may end up in
leading to burnout of some sort.
in problems in well-being, anxiety, depression, all this.
Okay.
But we can see that both genders have the same problem.
Yeah.
They would like to find more meaningful ways for learning that would be relevant for things that happen outside schools.
Yeah. When you and I chatted about this, you made a fascinating comment to me about boys taking up gaming, for example, and actually their scores in English surpassing girls. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Oh, this is interesting.
Yeah.
Now comes the other part of our research, which is what we called beyond screen time. How much do adults know about what kids are actually doing with their devices? More than 20% are active gamers. Action games mainly, and they are mainly boys. And already on 6th grade. And only 10% of kids are doing something creative, something really interest-driven, something knowledge-related. But the gamers are an interesting group because, as you suggested, in Finland already, boys are better in their English skills than girls, which is really interesting because it used to be vice versa. We usually think girls are more verbal. But it has to do with gaming communities. They're global communities, and the language is English.
Going back to your research, Dr. Lonka, can you tell me a little bit more? What is the thesis of bridging the gap?
Yeah, the thesis is if we now have boys who are getting increasingly cynical about school, it's losing its relevance in their minds, then what should we do with school? And especially if we think about using technology and this willingness to use technology in learning, what are we then doing to engage our students?
Yeah.
And that's kind of $1 million question.
Yeah. Well, that moves me on to my next question, actually, Dr. Lonka, is you're a very well-traveled professor. And I wondered if we take a little bit of a world tour now.
Yes.
And you share some great use case examples of where you've seen technology used well in a lesson or in a learning environment. I'd love to hear a bit more.
Well, actually, I'm also an extraordinary professor in South Africa, and I work a lot in China, training teachers and parents, and also in Middle East context. If you do any globe-trotting like this, you soon learn to understand that, for instance, in Global South, in Africa, hardly anybody has computer, mainly the teacher maybe, but everybody, even in the most challenging townships where I visited and we've had projects near Pretoria, South Africa, everybody has a smartphone in their pocket. Yeah. If we want to educate teachers, I think they would estimate needing 10 million teachers in Africa at least. We need to come and design training programs for adults and children that can be done with mobile phones, with smartphones.
Yeah.
And that's why everything we create is kind of compatible with not only computers but also phones.
Yeah.
And then it comes that it's the most affordable, most equal tool for learning globally.
Yeah.
And it's a huge privilege to have a computer in this world.
Yeah.
We are privileged, but not everybody is. Yeah. So if we stop developing applications that support learning and investigation and interest-driven activities, we would make a mistake, because we need the whole world to become well educated and use the devices that they have.
You've mentioned to me before when children use technology to pursue something that they're interested in, that they're learning, they get so inspired by the learning process. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
It's very interesting if we look at what happens beyond screen. We are just talking about screen time, and I think that's not very relevant. We need to know what people are doing there. And it's a minority of young people who are using technology deeply in learning and interest. Only about 10% of teenagers or high school students would use technology for intensive learning. And those who are using their smartphones for interest-driven and knowledge-driven activities have the best grades, and also their school engagement is highest. What is sad about this is majority of knowledge-driven activities with technologies take place outside schools. And inside school, the use of technology, it's not only Finland. We just looked at PISA 22 databases. We are investigating it with one PhD candidate in our team, and with professors who are very well informed about how to analyze this data. So we can see that in any country, it's quite rare that something meaningful with technology takes place at school. It's very low in any country.
Interesting.
And imagine what kind of inequality it would be if those few kids whose parents are maybe professors or more kind of aware of meaningful use of technology are the only ones who are doing well in high school and going to universities. I think that's a really big threat for equal society and equal opportunities for people.
What do truly productive uses of technology in the classroom look like when it comes to learning?
We have been looking more closely at those young people who are truly using technology in creative and productive ways. And if we use technology, if we just consume it, if the young people are just consumers of technology instead of creators, then that's not very good. Imagine if we had young people who are engaged in learning, who love learning, and who not just gaming, but creating games.
And is gaming and learning a good learning strategy, a good pedagogical strategy?
Actually, we've been investigating gamification. Gamification doesn't mean that you're on the computer like this, not necessarily. But gamification means that you have a meaningful challenge. You are constantly going to the next level, not only learning, but personalizing the motivation, the optimal learning moments of young people and adults. And gamification may be a huge benefit. For instance, I used myself, this is not very scientific, but I just used myself as a test, a guinea pig, and studied 2 years Spanish with a game. And I can already carry out some simple conversations, and I'm really engaged in learning different verbs and words and vocabulary and especially things like mathematics and languages, where you need endless repetition, endless practice in a meaningful context to get engaged and to experience flow and intrinsic motivation for learning. Gamification is a great tool to avoid boring kind of retention and go into engaging learning.
Oh, thank you. I can totally relate to that. And well done on your Spanish. I'm not going to try myself, but good to know. Good to know.
Try some Finnish.
Oh, no, maybe one day. So Finland's education system is applauded globally, and part of what you do in Finland is phenomenon-based learning. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means for those who are hearing the term for the first time?
Actually, we could talk about interdisciplinary learning. where we are not only learning subject matter, but we are bridging across disciplines. Think about learning now with these complex problems. They are quite ill-defined. In mathematics or chess, you have kind of understanding what is the right solution. But very many problems that we are dealing with are very complex and ill-defined and very fuzzy. And the world is getting increasingly fuzzy. And that's dangerous, because then it happens that people start being very polarized, having strong opinions, having kind of trying to feel safe, trying to find the truth, only one truth at the time. Instead, we should be treating problems like world economy, financial literacy, well-being in this kind of world that is very challenging at the moment, with war, economic crisis, all kinds of environmental crises. We need to learn how to tackle problems that are complex. And there are also dilemmas. There is no one solution for these problems. And of course, we want to protect our children. We don't want them to be anxious. We try to protect them, but we cannot protect them from the world.
So how does phenomenon-based learning or interdisciplinary learning look in the classroom then?
Well, it looks so that in the primary school in Finland, it's easy. We usually have one teacher who can teach like 10 different subjects. It can be very simple. For instance, like we have handicraft and arts and music and sports at school, mandatory subjects.
Yes.
Doing something, handicraft class, doing a bird's nest. Then in biology class, my husband is a school teacher. They do this. They would go to forest and put it on the tree together. And then on biology class, that would be the physical part, you know, hiking.
Yeah, climbing a tree.
And watching the birds finding their home.
Wow.
And then learning more about biology and nature and energy and all these phenomena that are of interest and curiosity of children. So we integrate chemistry, physics, biology together, because we investigate natural science phenomena from child's point of view, rather than silos from different subject matters at that point, and only later becomes more subject matter-based science learning.
And how is it different to project-based learning?
You do a project, and in the workplace, you have to kind of accomplish something. So there's project management, and it's very product-oriented, outcome-oriented. In interdisciplinary learning process, you are doing a project for learning. So it's more process-oriented. It means that you are interested in processing the information, learning about it. And it also calls for other competencies like social and emotional learning. In order to become a team player, you need to learn that.
You mentioned phenomenon-based learning working well up until grade 6. How does it carry on into high school, or what are the challenges for that sort of learning as you get older at school?
We have great subject matter teachers, but usually expertise tends to be domain-based. So I'm an expert in psychology, but I also need to know something about other domains and so on. In middle school or secondary, how you call it, teachers need to collaborate. And we have a problem in TALIS in this OECD investigations. Finnish teachers are not very collaborative. They are very good individually. And the problem is that teachers need to collaborate and learn from each other, and they need to tolerate questions outside the book. Children and young people are curious, and they need to investigate. They need to search for information. They need to find relevant sources. They need to find reliable sources. They need to bring in information. So it cannot be so that real world is always outside classroom. The idea is that real world is coming to the school, and school is going to the real world to make school more relevant for everybody.
Dr. Lonka, if phenomenon-based learning is so powerful, why don't we see more of it in schools? And how maybe might the advent of generative AI in education technology help things?
I actually think that these kinds of interdisciplinary or phenomenon-based projects are time-consuming. It's a different kind of learning. It takes time for teachers to collaborate together, different subject matter areas, and so on. But I can see a great potential in AI in this, different ways of using AI to support collaborative knowledge building. Because I'm also doing research on teachers' ideas about knowledge and learning. And if you think that learning is just like I'm transmitting information with spoon for you, then it's not very meaningful to use any technology. It's just like we need to have this epistemic change. We need to change our thinking about knowledge and learning and knowing. And AI is challenging all that because assessment is the tail that wags the dog. So nowadays with AI, it's not a good idea to assess just like trivial pursuit kind of questions, like trivial knowledge or multiple choice. But we need to come up with new assessment methods that are measuring deep level understanding, complex problem solving, and the ability to use AI as an aid for deeper understanding.
And how do you see AI being used to help people deepen their understanding?
We talk about hybrid AI, which means that it's not a tool, it's a liaison. We have intelligent networks where we have AI agents and human agents working together, and human agents need increasing amounts of critical thinking, creative thinking, higher level thinking, and many routine cognitive things can be somewhat shared with AI. I wouldn't say outsource. We need all kinds of basic skills in order to develop our brain.
Do you see AI potentially helping better interdisciplinary collaboration?
Yes, and we now are looking at with university teachers from different faculties. We have this saying that a good question is half of the answer. In order to get something out of AI, you need to be able to pose questions. Instead of learning being answering to teachers' questions, most important skill is to pose good questions. We call them prompts. We have a project in our university in the Faculty of Arts, which is digital humanities, so that you understand how different fields pose different kinds of questions. If you do interdisciplinary collaboration, you also learn how a scientist thinks, how a medical person thinks, how a medical doctor thinks, how a psychologist thinks. So you understand that there are different approaches to the same problem that we are trying to solve.
And is it fair to say that better reflects the complexities of our world and therefore our learning?
Absolutely. And then we learn to develop this perspective taking, that we can take different perspectives instead of saying that you are wrong, I'm right. Because perspective taking is fundamental for even world peace, so that we can take perspectives of different cultures, different people, do also intercultural projects, intercultural communication.
Thank you so much. Let's pivot now to PISA, if we may. If you wouldn't mind, some folks might have not heard of PISA before. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute to describe what it is and what it looks at.
It varies. Some countries are not very into this, but there are 65 OECD countries and some outside OECD countries participating in this kind of PISA test. And in different years, it has different focus. 2018, it was about science. 22, it was about mathematics. 25 is really interesting.
How so?
It's going to be about all these thinking skills I've been talking about. We are expecting the results in 26. It's about metacognition, which is thinking or understanding how you think, self-regulation, how you regulate yourself and your learning, digital skills, English skills, and also understanding science, developing even scientific attitudes and identities.
Which is very important.
Yes, and I'm really excited to see the results, how we are, for instance, doing there when we really are measuring these core competencies for the next century.
So you're looking forward to seeing the 2025 results?
Yes, when it's focusing even more on these digital skills. And it may be turning upside down the whole scene different countries than now are going to outperform in 25.
Can you expand on that? Is it fair for me to assume that that countries where tech use in the classroom is more embedded, that they might perform better? Or is that not what you're saying here?
I would be surprised if they weren't, because even layperson's thinking would be like, if you truly develop digital skills in this measurement and assessing it, then countries where you have well-developed technological skills taught at school would do much better.
And why do you think PISA is looking at digital competency in students?
I think that in OECD countries, they want to increase flourishing and prosperity of different countries and helping all these complex problems that we are facing right now, all kinds of crises that are going on, and also the challenges of AI. Mm-hmm. Human mind need to excel in a way that we need to constantly develop our thinking skills, our metacognition, which is understanding about how we use our minds.
Yeah.
Self-regulation. We need to learn how to regulate how we use our technological devices.
Yeah.
We need to regulate our use of smartphones. Mm-hmm. Everybody needs to know English language increasingly better because it's the language of internet. Mm-hmm. And also these new attitudes towards science. We need to understand what is an opinion and what is scientific research and what is the nature of knowledge and knowing in this AI era.
You've hit on something I wanted to ask you about. What is the importance of research in a world where we're assessing, say, the efficacy of technology being used in schools versus opinion?
My country has been financing many strategic large projects. So I'm not talking about my own research in this studio. I'm talking about a community, a network of 70 professors and their research teams and all what my colleagues been doing. And we are starting from shoulders of giants, trying to understand these complex phenomena. And the best way to do it, as we know, is scientific research to approximate the truth as well as we can. So my concern is that people have now strong opinions, for instance, banning all technology, going back to 1950s, protecting our children from the world. But they are living in the world, and outside school they are doing very complex and very demanding processes on their own. But we are leaving children and youth alone with their devices, and we are leaving them at the mercy of all this all kinds of algorithms, and teachers need to learn how to support algorithmic computational thinking and data security.
Let's go back to generative AI. From your perch, you've almost got like a global perspective of what might be happening in K through 12 and university. Why are you cautiously optimistic about the impact of generative AI in learning?
We can see the threats like deception and fraud and even deepfake videos and all this. But about the benefits is that also that we can increase educational equity. We can increase personalized learning and the students' access to kind of tools that foster their learning.
And you mentioned better equity in learning.
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Well, the idea is that we only reach better equity of learning if we teach these kinds of higher order thinking skills at school. And we teach that the human being is always the judge of what kind of information has grounds or evidence, and constantly train people to be critical and creative in their thinking. And this is going to profoundly change our thinking and learning and assessment at all levels of education. It forces us to become thinkers rather just some like copying machines who acquire knowledge for somebody else. We need to start focusing on meaningful learning that is engaging. And personalization means that we can balance the challenge to the skill level of the student, so that they don't get anxious, frustrated, or alienated, but they feel that they remain. It's like sports. Your coach would help you to the level where you are in order to make it better all the time.
So just stretching them that little bit further rather than too much.
I have this saying that we cannot take people out from their comfort zones, but we can gently expand the comfort zone all the time.
I'm going to steal that one. That's a great one. Thank you. Conversely, what are your fears around the impact of AI in learning?
It's a powerful weapon as well. And I know that we need to be really clear to educate our citizens to be they need to be immune against all kinds of propaganda and have a critical mind, which doesn't mean that we are critical towards other people. You are wrong. That's not the way. We need to be critical about our own thinking. How do I know this? Can I possibly know this?
Yeah.
Do I have even potential to know this? Who is the best expert? Where to find the right answers? What is a reliable source?
When you and I spoke, you had a great story about London taxi drivers and what happens in their brain. Can you share a bit more about that?
Neuroscientists right now are very concerned about outsourcing certain cognitive functions to technology. For instance, there is a very famous scientific experiment on London taxi drivers, and I know it's a good study and properly done. So this study about London taxi drivers as compared to bus drivers or ordinary drivers showed that the right hippocampus in their brain was getting thicker.
Wow.
And that's the part that is responsible for navigation.
Wow.
People who have dementia, they may get lost, for instance. But if you develop that kind of navigation skills, and with London taxi drivers, this part of the brain was especially strong. It didn't happen for bus drivers who drive routes that are already written for them. This is one example that what happens if we externalize navigation to navigators.
Yeah.
Nothing happens in our brain. We get lost. If something happens to satellite, I couldn't find my way home.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. It's a good metaphor.
Yeah.
If we outsource our intelligence to technologies, we don't find our way home.
Wonderful. Thank you. 2 more questions, Dr. Lonka. What does AI literacy mean to you?
There are some researchers who question this AI literacy, and maybe they are not thinking like a psychologist would think. From my perspective, AI literacy means that we are going to be the masters of knowledge and learning and thinking. And we can debate with AI, we can question AI, we can present good questions. We need to be the judges of what is reliable and what is not. And that calls AI literacy for me means the highest order thinking skills for all. And I think that increases equity, that people in all kinds of professions from all kinds of schools can develop those skills. But that calls for a lot of reforms in teacher education and in parent education. Parents and teachers and adults need to learn how these things work. They need to understand data security. They need to understand thinking skills. They need to understand regulation and how to help their kids to regulate the use of technologies in order to make best use of them.
Yeah. How would you describe this generation of students?
I have great belief in this generation of students. At the moment, they have great anxieties and frustrations, but also I believe in them. They are better than we were. They have so much knowledge and understanding, and we don't make use of it for us.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Lonka.